Previously on This Is Us.
That Jesus is the safest place for real people with real problems, with real lives, and with real questions.
We had raised these great kids, had a business that was successful, and then everything crashed like a house of cards.
But what I saw was that when I changed, everything else changed too. So I became more gracious and forgiving, and Jeff and I, our marriage got stronger, and I became a better mom. And so in the end, I think the best thing for her was the change in me.
And he just let me ask questions, real questions, hard questions.
Keen, who has Jesus ever really changed? And if you know his background, he's got a
Seminary.
Yeah, I'm not equipped to argue the Bible with my husband. But what I said to him was, I just looked at him and I said, you know what, Jesus changed me.
That even though we're not ideal, even though we're a mess sometimes, even though I make mistakes that hurt others, even though others have hurt me, even though the world is a mess, that we have discovered that Jesus runs toward us, no matter who the us is. Well, welcome to another episode of This Is Us, and I am very excited to dive into another incredible story, and I'm really excited to introduce you to another incredible family today. Before I get there, I just wanted to say this, that I am so grateful that I'm part of a church that is real, that is honest, that is real about life, real about the questions we face, real about ourselves, because sometimes we're real about the problems out there, sometimes not real about the problems in here. And I'm so grateful that we're real about those as well, and understand that even though we want to live up to certain ideals, we struggle to live up to our own ideals sometimes as well. I'm so grateful that we're a church who's real about that and honest, but then also real about the fact that Jesus was a man who lived in the first century, and every single person he interacted with was impacted for good. It's amazing, and whether you believe in Jesus or not, that's okay. You can literally take the accounts of Jesus in the Bible and put them aside and just look at the historical context of who Jesus is, because Roman historians wrote about him, Jewish historians wrote about him. He lived in the first century. And as you look at all these different accounts, you can see that this man helped people and brought hope over and over again. And this man always seemed to gravitate towards real people and away from hypocritical people. It's amazing to watch this man. And every time he interacted with people, it brought about some amazing and positive change. He brought hope and he brought help wherever he went. And I'm so grateful that we're a church that understands the reality of who we are and understands the reality of who Jesus was, and the fact that he's still doing this today, as seen in all the stories we've heard so far. If you haven't heard these stories, they are online. You can go listen to them as well. Now today, I want to introduce you to a family that faced real as well, a real life situation. It's a situation they didn't choose. If you'd ask any of them, they didn't choose that, and yet it is what it is. It is their life. It is what happened, and they've come face to face with this thing. Their story, though, is one of those stories that doesn't get spoken about in church often. And it doesn't get spoken about in church often, especially from a church stage, because it's one of those stories that has actually got to do with one of the most hot-button, emotional, even political topics in our religious world today. And it brings up emotions and it brings up thoughts, because everybody seems to have thoughts about this. Everybody seems to have opinions about this. And there's a whole bunch of talking and a whole bunch of statements and very little listening, oftentimes, in this situation. And so this is a hard topic. In fact, I was so nervous about sharing this today because I can't control what you think. I can't control where you go with this. And so there was a part of me that was very tempted not to go here, not to share this story, not to allow this couple to share this story. But then I remembered, wait a minute, this is us. This is us. And as uncomfortable as some of you may be as we talk about this, this is still us. This is still part of our story. This is still here at our church. This is in our community. And if we don't speak about it, We may miss out on being real about who we are and being real about how Jesus seemed to respond every single time when we realize that this is us. Because Jesus ran toward us, no matter who the us is, every single time. So I can't wait to introduce them to you. Before I do, though, I think I need to introduce you to another group of people who lived in the first century. And the reason I need to introduce this group of people is because knowing their situation, knowing what they experienced, will give some context to the story you're about to hear. And that's very important. So this group that I want to introduce you to from the first century was a group of people that elicited a bunch of emotion, a bunch of tension, a bunch of questions. Whenever anybody spoke about this group of people or came into contact with this group of people in the first century, people were like, they had a feeling came up. And not just a feeling, some major feelings sometimes, and a lot of, negative emotion. Cicero, the great Roman orator and statesman, and he wrote a bunch of stuff down. Even Cicero, not religiously or anything, he even said that there is ill will towards this group of people. So this was a cultural thing. This was a Roman thing. But then when you take the religious world and you add religion to this topic, add religion to this thing, then the emotions go through the roof. There is way, way, way more tension that arises when you speak about this group. In fact, let me put it this way. The religion of the day pushed this group of people so far away from religion, from being welcomed in, so far away that they were never welcomed in and that they never felt comfortable around religion. That's what religion and the religious leaders of the day did to this group of people. You want to know who this group was? It was the tax collectors. Now, some of you go, I agree. The IRS, what? But here's the thing. It wasn't just a group. It wasn't just people. It wasn't just the tax collectors. It became personal. There were people involved. And when a tax collector, a person, walked into a room, everybody looked. Everybody changed. Everybody felt uncomfortable. And the interesting thing is, not only was there ill will publicly and culturally, but when religion came into it, somehow, according to religion, the religion of the day, tax collectors basically had their own category of people. Here's what I mean. The religion of the day, they would literally look at the general population and say, there's people, the general populace, and they're not good either. They don't live up to the standards, the righteous, holy standards of who we are as religious leaders. So there's the general people. They're just general, not good, but they're general. And then, aside from them, there's the tax collectors. And religious leaders actually encouraged and told their followers, don't even eat with tax collectors. They are unacceptable. They are unwelcome. You cannot eat with them. If you eat with them, you get their kind of oogies with you as well. Do not hang out. Do not eat with tax collectors. They created their own category. And as such, any person from a tax collector who was a tax collector, any person from that group was treated with less respect, less acceptance, and less grace than anyone else in the general population. They were given their own category. They were pushed aside. And think about it. If you were a tax collector in that time and you were treated that way, you were seen that way, how would you feel? Would you feel welcome? No. How would you feel comfortable in a setting where religion comes up, where God comes up, if you were seen as something completely different from everybody else? I wouldn't feel comfortable. And that's the thing. Religion created these categories. The categories was there's the general people, and then there's the tax collectors. And they're different, and they were treated different. Let me show you a few passages in Scripture and how the people who wrote the story of Jesus explained how the culture and how the religion of the day felt this. Let me show you. In Mark wrote this. He said, and when the scribes and the Pharisees, that's the religious leaders of the day, saw him eating with tax collectors and sinners. See the two categories. There's sinners and the general people who don't live up to who we are. There's the sinners, and then there's tax collectors. So when he was eating with tax collectors and sinners, they said to his disciples, how is it that he eats and drinks with tax collectors and sinners? There was a separate category of people. Luke also describes this, and he uses the culture of the day and explains how people felt when there was a group of people who listened to what Jesus was teaching. Look how he described the response of the crowd. He said, all the people, all the general people, those people who aren't as good as us because we're righteous and holy religious leaders, all the people, even the tax collectors. See, once again, there's this separate category that was created for a group of people. And as such, they were treated differently. Even the tax collectors, when they heard Jesus' words, acknowledged that God's ways were right. Well, God's way was right. There's this division. There's this new category that people were categorizing people in. Now I want to show you another parable that Jesus actually spoke about, and he used this concept of people thinking that the righteous people, the Pharisees, and the worst of the worst are the people who are separated out and not treated the same, the tax collectors. And he used this to teach some amazing lessons. Look what he says. To some who were confident in their own righteousness, which, by the way, there's so much good stuff in this parable, this story that Jesus told with a point to teach something. There's so many good lessons that we can't look at today because of time. I want to look at the one idea. To those who were confident in their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else. Important. Very important. Jesus told this parable. He said, 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One a Pharisee, the religious leader, and the other, a tax collector. And everybody's like, oh, tax collectors, they were different. One a Pharisee and one a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people. There's that general again. Everybody else fits into that category. And look how he defines the other people. Robbers, evildoers, adulterers. Those are the other people. Thank you that I'm not like other people. Or even like this tax collector. You see how in their culture, tax collectors didn't fit in the general people, other people. Somehow, they had created this category, this divide, and pushed certain people just because. I don't even know why. There's some ideas, but they just pushed them aside, made their own category. I'm not even like other people or even like this tax collector. Here's why. Because I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of all I get. I do my religious, rights, I do my religious things well enough, and I'm not like them. But look at the contrast that Jesus made now. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And then Jesus summarizes it and explains the point. He says, I tell you that this man, the tax collector, rather than the other, went home justified before God, as God sees this. This man went home justified before God. For all those huge point who exalt themselves will be humbled. Huge. And all those who humble themselves will be exalted. Now, again, there's so much in that we could talk about, but I don't have time to go there. The point that I want to make is this. Over and over and over again in the first century, there was a group of people, the tax collectors, who had sort of been categorized into a different group of people and treated differently and seen differently and felt differently about than the rest of the population. That was just a reality. And the reason I bring it up is not because I need to talk about a first century problem. The reason I bring it up is because I don't think that's just a first century problem. I think it's a problem. I think it's a human problem. I think we as humans seem to tend to categorize. In fact, let me put it this way. There is something in the human heart, I believe. And if you're human and have a heart, I think there is something in your heart and my heart that tends to categorize people into these categories. What we deem as acceptable and what we deem as unacceptable. And when we begin to categorize people, when we begin to categorize groups, once we categorize these people into different groups, our attitudes toward them, our acceptance of them, and our treatment of those people change. Every one of us has this tendency to categorize. Every one of us has this idea. And when you categorize, when you put someone in a different bucket from you, when you see someone as differently, and you begin to feel sort of less respect, maybe less acceptance, give less grace. When you begin to do that, your acceptance of and your attitude toward, and eventually, not intentionally, but your treatment, sometimes intentionally, I guess, but most times not, your treatment of people in that category that you've made changes who you are, changes how you act. So the question I have for us today is this. Who have I categorized? Who have you categorized? Who have you put in a different bucket to you? Who have you put in a different group to you? And then this next question is almost more important. And here's the question, and then I'll explain. Who has today's religious community categorized? And the reason this is almost more important is because we as the church, if you're a Christian, you as a Christian represent God in some way. And if your category of people determines how you interact with a group of people, you represent God. And if a religious community, if the church has categorized certain people and begin to treat them slightly differently even, and slightly less welcome and slightly less comfortable, we are representing God in that moment. So this is a huge question we need to ask. Who have I categorized, and who has today's religious community categorized? I have an idea of who we have. And you have your own category, you have your own thoughts. And listen, this has happened throughout history. The reality is you can think back through history and think there were the Jews that were categorized in one way in Nazi Germany. There were racial things, there were women's rights, there were all these things. But throughout history, someone has been, and I think today, in the church, there's a group of people that have felt something similar to what tax collectors felt in the first century. It's not the same for everybody, it's not the same for every church. But I think generally, the group of people that the religious community today is categorized as different is the LGBT community. And I don't know if that's true for you. I can't say it is, but I think in general, as I've spoken with people from the LGBT community, I feel like this is a reality that's happened. Now again, I can't control how you feel right now, but as I've looked at it, as I've discovered, as I've had conversations, as I've looked at the church, I feel like in some way we have done what happened in the first century when people listed general people and then there were. Somehow in the first century there were sinners and tax collectors. And somehow today, it seems like there are sinners and the LGBT community. That somehow there's a different feeling, there's a different requirement, there's a different question, there's a different attitude. And so today, I think we need to ask a really important question. The question we need to ask is this: how did Jesus respond to a group that had been categorized as different? Because he was very clear. Very, very clear. And once we know that, then the next question becomes so incredibly important. Once we know how Jesus responded to the group that was categorized as different, we need to ask, and how should we, as Jesus followers, respond to that group of people? So that's what I want to look at today. Before I do, though, I'd like to introduce you to a family that has walked this journey, this concept, this thing, very, very personally. So, this is Chuck and Wendy Allen. Watch the screens.
Hi, I'm Chuck Allen.
And I'm Wendy Allen. And we have been together for lots of years. We're actually high school sweethearts. We got married young. I was 19, he was 20. We've next week we celebrate our 30th wedding anniversary, so that's kind of exciting for us. We met on the school bus. My bus stop was after his bus stop. And if anyone sat in his seat, I got very upset because I wanted to sit with him. So I told everybody that, please don't sit with him because I really want to sit with him.
I think after a few weeks, I started to like her. I was like, wow, how lucky am I that someone keeps sitting with me.
We have 4 children. We went to college together, and then as soon as we graduated, we want to have a baby, so got pregnant with Casey right away.
We were excited, our first child. We were excited. I remember when he gave me the news, and I was like, wow, I can't believe it. And it was just really exciting.
Yep, I wanted to be a mom from the time I started babysitting. And then we have Emily, who is 21. And then we waited a long time before we had more children. Right before we turned 40, we felt like we wanted more children, so we tried and got pregnant right away with Olivia, number 3. And then somehow God wanted us to have another one because we don't know how it happened, but we have number 4, Ella, who's 8.
For us, it's just, we don't always see eye to eye, and there's always those things, but typically we're very, we love one another, and it's just somehow we seem to make it work, and it seems to come easy for us, fortunately.
Oh yes, it's like I always say, our home is calm and comfortable, and we're just happy to be together. We have fun together.
My parents really didn't attend church, but I was in vacation Bible school. They would send me to that. They wanted me to be involved in the church, but it was kind of off and on. Some weeks we would go, some weeks we wouldn't. So, but I always, understood there was a God, and I always thought if I was good, then that's what it was about.
My relationship with Jesus didn't happen until I was in college, but something didn't feel right to me. Every week I would hear the sermons, and I would leave and I would feel guilty. So I don't think I truly had a relationship with Jesus yet. I just was going through the motions of going to church and being a good person, and I thought I was a good person, but I would feel guilty, and it just didn't seem right. When I was 4, my parents got divorced and my dad left, and that was really hard for me because my father figure left, and so I tried to do everything I could to be loved by my stepfather and to try to make sure I did everything right. So I went with my relationship with God. I didn't want to do anything wrong. I wanted everything to be done the right way, and just try to be good, basically good, so that I was doing the right thing. I always felt like being a Christian was doing the right thing and making sure you're following the rules and doing good and not sinning, basically. And with that came the feeling that if someone else was different than me or not living up to those standards, I just felt like it made me feel uncomfortable and uneasy, and I felt like they weren't living the life that they should be. They weren't following the rules. I felt like I was judging them, basically judging other people.
In my church experience, that was the message when I was younger, that's the message I heard it was about the rules, keeping the rules, doing this, not doing the bad things. It really wasn't a whole lot that I recall as a young child loving other people. It was pretty much being good.
Right, and what you do.
And what I do and the things I do. So, and I was always a good kid. I never really got into trouble, and kind of following those rules was part of my life. And, I felt like I was doing the right thing by doing that. That message started to change from being focused on the rules and about what Jesus did and what we were supposed to do in response to that. And as a result of that, about the same time, it clicked for both of us. We both wanted to serve. We both wanted to have our children in church, and we wanted to attend. We didn't want to just go once a month, it became more important to us.
We actually all got baptized together as a family, and that was really an amazing thing for us. Family at that point was going really great until we had a 1 year in our life that was filled with tragedy. First, Chuck's mom passed away, and then a few months later, my sister passed away, and that was really hard because she was only 30. Then September 11th happened that same year, and then Chuck's dad died that same year. So all within 1 year, all those 4 things happened, and we luckily, I think that we ran towards God instead of got angry with him, because I feel like some people might say, how can all this be happening to us in 1 year? But it brought us closer together, and our faith got stronger.
For me, it was watching Wendy go through that, and I could see her leaning on God really strongly, and I could see
I wouldn't have gotten through it without God. There's no way.
Because I know her, I know she thinks about these things, and I know she tries to fix things at times, but I could tell that she was letting go and letting God, really help encourage and strengthen her in that time. So.
Right, yeah. During that crazy year of sadness and just loneliness and not understanding why all this was happening to our family, I just realized that I needed God more than ever, and my relationship with him grew tremendously. I realized that, I thought I was doing everything right and things were going well, and then when all that happened, I realized that I'm not in control of anything, that only he is. Okay, so when Casey was 18, he was going to USF, and he was newly in college, and he's always been very responsible. He's always made his own money. He bought his own first car, pays for his insurance, his phone. I mean, he's just a responsible kid. And he asked me, he said, "Mom, do you have $20 I can borrow for gas?" And I said, "Sure, I'll give you $20. He said, "Yeah, I'm going to the movies with Nick." And I said, "Well, if you need money for gas, how do you have money to buy a movie ticket?" And he said, "Oh, well, Nick's gonna buy it for me." And the way he said it, like a red flag went off in my head. And I didn't really think, it just came out. I said, "Is Nick gay?" And Casey's face like sank, and he said, "Actually, yeah, he is." And then my heart sank, and I said, "Well, are you gay?" And Casey said, "Actually, Mom, this is something I've been wanting to talk to you about for a really long time." And I was just like, oh my goodness, I didn't know how to react to it. My heart was beating out of my chest. I was like, oh, wow. And he said to me, "Are you okay, Mom?" And I said, "Not really. Actually, no, I'm not okay." And he's like, "Well, I don't think he knew what to say, and I didn't know what to say." And he said, "I really need to go to the movies, Mom." And I said, "Okay, go ahead and go." And then he left, and it was just me by myself. All the other kids were at school or napping, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to think. I just was like, my world just changed. Chuck was out of town on a business trip, so I didn't feel like I could tell him over the phone. I didn't know what to do. I just basically, I cried a little bit, but I went into fix-it mode. I was like, okay, this is just something he's going through. He's young, he's trying to figure out who he is. I know we're gonna be able to fix this, is what my first thoughts were. How can I fix this? What do I need to do with this? How does this happen to us? How do two Christian heterosexual people have a gay child? How does that happen? I probably didn't sleep at all that night, and the next day, Casey and I got to have a really good conversation, and I told him that this isn't the life I want for you, Casey. This is not an easy life, and I want your life to be happy and easy. And he said, "You know what, Mom, it's okay. This is my life, and I'm gonna have a good life, and I'm gonna be successful." And I probably said things to him that I wish I didn't say, because I felt like it wasn't gonna be like this forever. This was just a stage he was going through. And so, it was a good conversation, and he did ask me to please don't kick me out. And that to me is so sad that he had to even say that, because, the people that you love the most, he felt like maybe we might kick him out. And that never crossed my mind. I would never do that. I love him too much. Well, of course, as a mom, you try to do everything right and make sure you make the right decisions for your children. And I felt like I must have done something wrong. And I even asked Casey, I said, "Casey, what did I do wrong?" And Casey said, "Mom, you didn't do anything wrong. You're the best mom, and I love you." And so I took it as something that I did wrong and that I could fix it. And, it just made me feel like ashamed, or, like it wasn't what I had hoped for. My dreams, I kind of had to go through a mourning of the life that I wanted for him. It was not going to be what I had envisioned. He wasn't going to bring his wife home and his children home at Christmas time when he got married, and just the thoughts and the dreams that you have for your children were kind of crushed when I found out that he was gay. Yeah, I went through so many emotions through this whole process of finding out he was gay, and trying to figure out how to navigate through this. I love him. I always will love him, and I love him to death still, but I got a little angry at him because I felt like he was doing this to me and to our family, and how could he do something that was going to hurt us so much and change our family? And I was very selfish. I just felt, I never thought about how he felt. I only thought about how I felt.
So here's a real life situation, a real life family going through something that totally blows up every category and totally creates potentially a new category. This family came not an idea out there, but face to face, life to life, father to son, mother to son, with this really tough religious situation. And what happened was it no longer was a theory, no longer was a concept, no longer was a thing out there, no longer was a point to be made. Now it was a person. It was their son. And that changes things a little, doesn't it? And not only was it a person, but suddenly this person in their life, in their family that they love, this person was suddenly thrust into a category that is treated differently by the religious world sometimes. Into a category that is often not intentionally, often intentionally, but often not intentionally. A category that is made to feel unwelcome, sort of, until you do some stuff differently, and uncomfortable. I had lunch with Casey and asked him if we could share the story. And you know what one word he kept saying to me is? Every time he would go to church, he would feel uncomfortable. And suddenly Casey now was in a category of being unwelcome and uncomfortable. This is why, as Christians, as Jesus followers, as the church, this is why we have to understand what Jesus' response to this is. And the cool thing is we know it. It's clear. Jesus made that so clear. And the person, I love this as well, the person who recorded Jesus' response to someone who's treated differently because of the category they find themselves in, the person who wrote this was in that category. Matthew was a tax collector. And he spoke about Jesus' first interaction with him. So I want to show you what Matthew said. Let's take a look at Matthew chapter 9. This is the first time Matthew meets Jesus. As Jesus went on from there, he was coming from somewhere. He saw a man named Matthew, the same Matthew who wrote this. Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. He was a tax collector. And Jesus went up to him and he said, "Follow me." He didn't say change. He didn't say do different. He didn't say believe different. He didn't say once you do X, Y, Z, then you come follow me. He said, "Follow me. You're welcome. Come. You're welcome to join. Come be part of this thing. Come." But he's a tax collector. But the religious people say, don't eat with them. No, I know. Follow me. Come on. Follow me. And Matthew, in that culture, who was ostracized by every other religious person, Matthew said, he was like, okay, Matthew got up and followed him. Sure, this man represents Jesus, represents God. Okay, that's never been said to me. So while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house. Let's go have dinner, Matthew. Religious leaders, don't eat with them. Jesus is like, come on, follow me, let's have dinner. While Jesus was having dinner, this is interesting, many tax collectors, because you know why? They felt comfortable with Jesus. They felt welcome. So many followed Jesus. And sinners, it's still Matthew himself describes tax collectors and sinners, came and ate with him and his disciples. Now, when the religious leaders come on the scene, when the Pharisees saw this, guess what they did? They asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Divide again, categorize again, they're different again. Why does he do that? But Jesus heard them this time. And on hearing this, Jesus said, so big, so important, it is not the healthy who need a doctor. If you don't think you need help, a doctor can't help you. If you don't think you need help, I can't help you. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Someone who acknowledges their need can get help. And then he said, but go and learn what this means. You leaders, you Pharisees, you religious leaders, go learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And when he said sacrifice, what he was talking about was their entire religious system, because it was a sacrificial system. I desire mercy, not your perfect religious rites, not your perfect religious formalities that you do. You say you fast all the time and you give money. That doesn't matter anything to me if mercy is lacking. What he was basically saying is this: when mercy is lacking, religious formalities are meaningless. You give, you fast, you read, you act. You have no mercy, no compassion, no love. That's meaningless. And this is Jesus' words. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And then he said, I think one of the most powerful things that Matthew had ever heard. But when we read this, we don't even feel a bit of the emotion. We read past it straight away. And only Matthew could have understood the weight of what Jesus said next. Because he was a tax collector. He was in the group that was unwelcome and uncomfortable. Look at what he said. Jesus said, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. You see it there? We don't see it. You know why? Because when Matthew heard this, this is what he was expecting. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners and tax collectors. And for the first time in a religious environment, Jesus didn't categorize. That is huge. Jesus took everyone and put them in one category: sinners. And included you and me and Pharisees and leaders and politicians and tax collectors and LGBT and pastors and whoever. Jesus put everyone in one category, and in that moment, only Matthew could have felt the weight of 3 missing words. Because in that moment he said, I have not come to call the righteous, which, by the way, there aren't any. No matter how great they make themselves look, they are not righteous before a holy God. But I have come to call sinners. One category with everyone in. His whole life, Matthew had felt unwelcome. His whole life, all he had ever heard was there's the general people and then there's you guys. His whole life, all he had heard, there's the general, you guys are sinners, but we treat tax collectors differently. And suddenly Jesus said, no, one category, one group, and everyone is in that group. His whole life in a religious situation, Matthew had no access, basically, to God because he was not welcome into that circle because of the group he found himself in. He was not welcome. And now suddenly he finds himself at a table with this man who seems to represent God. And he's having dinner with him. He's comfortable. Jesus made him feel comfortable. And he made him feel welcome. He said, follow me. Come on. You can join. You are in the same bucket as everyone else, and you are welcome. And you know what Jesus' response to the sinners? And if you're offended by being called sinners by Jesus, don't be. Sorry, that's blunt, but don't be. And here's why. Because you know in your heart you don't even live up to your own ideals, let alone God's. Okay, so if God's looking down, that's okay. That's okay. All of us find ourselves in that bucket. And you know what Jesus' response to that bucket is? The response to sinners? Do you know what his response is? Not judgment, but I will help, I will serve, I will love, and I will die for you. That's what Jesus' response is. That's how Jesus responds to this category of people. He says, forget the stupid categories, there's only one. And all of you fit in the same category. And the minute you think you don't, then I can't help you. I can't help you. That's Jesus' response. Let's see how the Allens responded and hear the last bit of their story.
We spent a long time talking with Casey, late into the evening, and it was almost as if we had one chance to say everything we could think of to change his mind, to get him to see the things the way we saw them. And similar to the way what Wendy says, is almost, I feel ashamed that I even thought that at this point, because certainly I don't know how to solve that, that issue, that my feelings, Wendy's feelings, his feelings, all of that, trying to come up with the best answer. It's, there's not an answer for that, especially in one evening of discussion, but that's what I was hoping for, at least start a conversation to redirect his path and re-guide him in a way that we thought, this is what's best for you. And all the time it was what we wanted, not understanding him.
He was thinking.
Not until months later did I even think about what he may have been going through, struggling with this as a young man. Mm-hmm. Growing up, Casey obviously looked to Wendy and I and the way we led our lives. And I'm sure there's things that I said, that reactions I've had over those years, that when he looked back, he could probably remember a time when I wasn't loving to someone that was gay. I may have said some things that weren't, it would have made him think how I would think about him being gay. So he probably already had that in his mind. And so again, just like we wanted to fix it for ourselves, he was looking at it from his perspective as well. And without a conversation and without, working through this together, I think he had that perception that we wouldn't accept it. We had our opinions about it, and we were going to want to fix him. And that's kind of where we were.
Happened. Unfortunately, right? Mm-hmm. I remember hearing him. He was in his room and he was talking to his friend on the phone, and I heard him say, "Yeah, Mom, we had a long talk, but they don't understand, and I'm just gonna have to live my life, and it's gonna be okay." And my heart felt so sad, that he felt that way, because we never really thought about him. We thought about us.
The first thought was never about what's in his heart, what's he going through, because I was struggling with the same thing in my heart. And
I think that he said that I don't understand because I didn't understand. I did not get it.
Seeing Wendy change, it allowed me to start seeing Casey differently as well, and focusing more on him, and then recognizing maybe how we reacted wasn't the most helpful way. And focus on him as a person. He's my son, and loving him no matter what was important. It was that was what I could do, even though I wanted to fix things initially. And in life, we want to fix things that we're not comfortable with. I don't know that we're always a part of the fixing. I don't know we're always a part of the fixing, but I feel that, we're all capable of loving other people. We might not have all the answers. We can look up answers. We can try to get the answers. I don't know if I am crying like this. What I want to say is, we can love other people. We don't have to fix it. Some things might not ever get fixed the way we want. But I think we're all capable of loving other people, especially our own family. But anyone that's not like us, that God's given us that ability, I think, to love other people. And we just need to recognize it and use that, and not be so hung up on fixing things the way we want things to be. By loving other people and loving Casey, that'll make the difference, and not, my comfort level of where we're at with things at any given time.
The bottom line is, no matter how upset we were, Casey was the most important thing, and his salvation is the most important thing, that he deserves to be loved. Jesus loves him just as much as he loves us.
Yeah, and it's as if you focus on him being gay, as that has to get fixed first. And I don't think Jesus showed us that. When he encountered people, he loved them. And I think over time, he had an impact on them. Obviously, he died for them, but
Regardless of how we feel, they have the same right to Christ as we have. They deserve Jesus' love, and their salvation is just as important as everyone's. And we need to love them just like we love a heterosexual person. It doesn't matter, they're still a person. We forget that. We put that label on someone, and that's all we see. We don't see the person. God just kept telling me over and over again, and it took me probably 2 years to really hear him. He just kept saying, because I would say, what can I do to fix this or change this? And he said, you don't have to do anything, Wendy. You just have to love your son. Well, my first reaction was shock and sadness and disappointment and embarrassment. Now, where I am today is completely different to where I was. My son has taught me more about loving someone unconditionally than anyone could have ever taught me. I see people differently. I love people differently. I don't see them as different. They're people. Everyone is a person, and everyone deserves to be seen that way and not to be judged.
Life isn't perfect, but this is us. Life does not go to where we think it's going to go all the time, but this is us. Faith doesn't fit in cute little boxes all the time. Life is messy and throws things at us that sometimes changes our perception, changes what's happening, changes our expectations, changes everything about how we see it. Life is not perfect, but this is us. The question is, what do we do when that happens? What do we do when something happens? And how do we treat people when that happens? And then how do we navigate our faith? And how do we follow Jesus when that happens? I'm so grateful that the Allens chose to lean so strongly into Jesus. A Jesus who consistently made people, no matter what category they found themselves in, no matter what label they were given, Jesus constantly made people feel comfortable around him and welcome. Comfortable enough and welcome enough for them to get to know who he was. And when they did, they liked him. They liked him. And he was able to offer the help and the hope that every one of us needs in this world now and for eternity to come. The religious world of the day had done such a great job of excluding a group and making them feel so unwelcome and so uncomfortable that they had almost assured that they would not find the help and the hope that everyone deserves, or that God has given everyone. The religious community had done such a good job of making people feel like they were categorically different, that they were not welcomed in. That leads to 3 questions I want to end with. First question is this: what categories do you have? What buckets have you put people in? And are you in the same bucket? Because when Jesus looks at you and me, we're in the same bucket, no matter where we are, no matter what we've done. We're in the same bucket. Secondly, how do you treat people in that other category that you've made? How do you treat people in that category? And lastly, and this is one of the most important questions we can ask, in our treatment, whether it's intentional or not, are we potentially making people feel unwelcome and uncomfortable enough to deny them access to knowing who Jesus is? That's big. As the church, as Christians, are we potentially, through how we make people feel because we've created categories, are we making people feel uncomfortable and unwelcome to the point where they may not, because they see us, they see Jesus, religion, the whole deal, where they may not want to get to know this incredible Jesus who loves and died for them? If that's true, if we've done that, maybe we need Jesus to change us. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you that you love. Thank you that, Jesus, you did not have categories. You did not put me in a different category. Imagine I was in a different category and I did not have access, easy, comfortable, welcoming access to you. Thank you that you didn't do that. And God, I pray that we will not allow ourselves to not follow you in this. Jesus, thank you for the example of how you treated people in a different category. A fabricated category, a religiously designed category that you never made. Father, help us see ourselves and everyone else in one category of people who need you. Father, I pray you help us do that and change us so that we will not be the same as we used to be. In Jesus' name, amen.